Waiting on indictments is training us to outsource our conscience, but it's even worse than that. It dilutes our spiritual integrity. And if you are deconstructing, you may not recognize that this is a reflection of our patriarchal Christian indoctrination. So let's talk about what we need to do to deconstruct from this and use our moral outrage for the good of the whole. I'm Rev Karla. I'm a former Christian and a minister to the unchurched. I help people deconstruct and heal from Christian patriarchy and reclaim their spirituality after leaving church. I am the author of Deconstructing. You can find it where books are sold, and you can get a signed copy here in the TikTok shop. I want to start by giving some context to what you may be experiencing and why this is important to the deconstructing Christian. Let's start with this concept of moral outrage. Moral outrage is the internal alarm that sounds when human dignity is violated. It is conscience refusing to normalize harm. But let's also talk about righteous anger. This is anger that's aligned with protection of the vulnerable. It is discipline, purposeful energy that pushes back against abuse of power. And finally, the arc of the moral universe. Let's have a quick history on this phrase. The arc of the moral universe originated with abolitionist minister Theodore Parker in 1853, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. later made it famous during the Civil Rights Movement. And when Dr. King used it, he was speaking to people actively organizing and sacrificing for justice, not passively waiting for it. President Obama later echoed the phrase to remind the nation that progress happens when ordinary people choose to bend history towards justice. So the arc of the moral universe can be described as this long trajectory of justice shaped by collective action. And it bends when ordinary people apply sustained moral pressure, not when they passively wait for institutions to act. So what does that mean to us in this moment? Well, in Christian patriarchal systems, many of us were not trained to trust our moral outrage. We were trained to ignore it or submit it to church authority. We were taught that leaders define what is moral, what is sinful, what deserves outrage, and what should be ignored. Anger was labeled as rebellion when it challenged authority, but it was celebrated when it defended the structure that protected white Christian men, which is the patriarchal structure upon which our churches, our government, our institutions, and many of our homes were built. Outrage was permitted and encouraged for the right cultural enemies, but discouraged when it implicated powerful men inside any of those systems. So then what happened? The obedient were rewarded for silence, not for discernment. Righteous anger was often recoded as bitterness if it threatened institutional stability. And that meant that moral outrage was often reframed as gossip or division or lack of grace if you were asking for leaders to be accountable for something they did. And over time, many of us learned to distrust our inner alarm system and our own moral compass. And that conditioning does not disappear when we leave church. It follows us into politics, into culture, into how we respond when powerful names are attached to harm. So you'll hear people say things like, well, let's wait for the indictments. Surely someone's going to be arrested. And that reflex is directly related to our Christian patriarchal indoctrination. Deconstructing means you reclaim that right to define moral clarity without waiting for a pastor, a politician, or a lawyer to authorize it. Your conscience does not require institutional permission because many of us were trained inside church systems to protect institutions over people. We were taught to leave judgment to God, to forgive quickly, to preserve the reputation of the leader. And the truth is, many of us saw pastors who covered abuse while they were preaching about grace. We saw institutions be silent about the victims so that they could protect the brand of their church. church. And it may be so damaging to us now that some people believe that because there are no indictments, none of the files can be true. That's how we continue to do harm after leaving church if we do not deconstruct from this. So let's bring this back to spiritual responsibility. Deconstructing is not only about leaving bad theology or leaving church. It is about retraining your moral instincts. Spiritual maturity means asking, who am I protecting in this moment? Listen, you do not need to be an Epstein Files expert to be a part of the collective that needs to rise up to demand survivor stories be heard and believed and abusers be held accountable. If your instinct is to shield the powerful from scrutiny while survivors are dismissed as inconvenient, that deserves examination. And I'll be honest, it's one thing to turn away from the details in the files, and another thing to turn away from the accountability that needs to happen because the files exist. This is not about vengeance. This is about justice, and justice is alignment with the vulnerable. Turning away because the information is overwhelming does not make it disappear, and it does not make you a good person. I understand that it can be overwhelming, and that overwhelm may be coming from something that triggers deep inside you. You do not need to know every document to recognize this pattern of proximity and the narrative control that's happening. Staying present to that pattern is part of spiritual integrity. Now, the legal system may move slowly. There may be indictments coming down. But remember this, the arc of the moral universe bends when ordinary people refuse to lower their standards for powerful men. If you are deconstructing from Christian patriarchy, this is part of the work. We have to ask ourselves, are we defending Christian patriarchal systems with our silence? Because if you are not lending your voice to the ones who are calling for resignations or dismissals, then you need to ask yourself what part of you is ignoring the pain of the victims and the survivors. Choosing to stand with and lend your voice to those who were exploited and abused is spiritual integrity. Spirituality that avoids injustice becomes performative. My friends, we are running out of time. We do not have time for performative spirituality. We are here for moral and spiritual courage and to leave this world a better place than we found it. That is what it means when you bind your spirituality to empathic humanity. And there's nothing more important in this world. Now, if you're deconstructing and you want to heal from Christian patriarchy and reclaim your spirituality after leaving church, be sure to hit subscribe so you can be notified when my latest teachings are available.